Most goalies backed up. Billy Smith stepped forward. The crease wasn't space. It was his territory. Pucks came in. So did bodies. They didn't call him emotional. They didn't call him reckless. They called him the biggest psychopath in the crease, and the league kept letting it happen. Fear became the strategy, and it worked. Billy Smith entered professional hockey at a time when goaltending was not a protected craft, but an exposed position, and survival depended as much on intimidation as skill. He grew up playing in an era where goalies were treated as obstacles rather than assets, where forwards crashed the crease without consequence, and where referees rarely intervened to protect the man in the mask.
If the referees aren't going to call it, and the league is not going to do something about it, then you got to put fear of the God in the player, that if he's going to run into you or run over you in the net, there's a possibility that he's going to get hurt as well as me.
There was no strict enforcement of goalie interference and no expectation that a whistle would stop bodies from piling into the net. If a goalie went down, play often continued, and injuries were considered part of the job. From his earliest professional games, Smith learned that talent alone would not keep him upright or employed. Opposing players crowded the crease intentionally, hacked at pads, jammed for loose pucks, and made physical contact with the goalie because it created chaos and goals. For a young goaltender trying to establish himself, this was a constant threat. Smith understood quickly that if he allowed himself to be treated as easy to push around, his career would be shortened by injury or irrelevance. The lesson was blunt, but unavoidable. If he didn't make players afraid to come near him, they would keep coming until he broke. When players lingered near the net, he didn't wait for the puck to arrive. When bodies leaned into him, he responded immediately. Each slash, jab, or shove served a clear purpose, which was to send a message that access to the crease carried a cost. Smith wasn't reacting out of anger or spectacle. He was trying to condition behavior, to teach opponents that standing near him was a losing decision. Coaches expected toughness. Teammates valued players who refused to be bullied, and the league largely tolerated violent responses, as long as they stayed within the flow of play. Goalies who showed weakness were replaced quickly, and Smith was keenly aware that his job security depended on appearing unbreakable. What later critics would describe as madness began as defense, shaped by necessity. Before Billy Smith was labeled a psychopath, he was a goaltender, responding to the conditions in front of him, learning through experience that fear worked when rules didn't, and choosing to become something opponents would avoid rather than something they could exploit. What looked like intimidation was already becoming something else entirely: repetition. By the early 1980s, Billy Smith was no longer just responding to players in front of his net. He was setting the rules for what happened there. When opponents stayed too close, he didn't wait for a collision or a loose puck. He acted first, using his stick to make the point clear. In the 1980s playoffs against Buffalo, Smith butt-ended Lindy Ruff in the face during a scramble near the crease. Ruff went down in pain, and the incident later pushed the league to change how goalie sticks were built. The message spread quickly around the NHL. Standing near Smith's net came with a price.
You know, the stick swinging has got to go. I could have lost an eye in my incident, and you lose a lot of respect there. But as far as I'm concerned, he's a hell of a goalie. But the manner he swings his switch, his stick is, something to be desired.
That pattern showed up again on the biggest stage. During the 1983 Stanley Cup Finals, Smith slashed Glenn Anderson across the knee after a play near the crease, leaving Anderson hurt and furious. Later in the same series, Smith swung his stick at Wayne Gretzky as Gretzky tried to skate behind the net, touching off a confrontation that shocked even veteran officials. These moments didn't come after bad goals or emotional breakdowns. They came when Smith felt his space had been crossed. What stood out to players wasn't just the violence, but the consistency. Status didn't matter. Superstars were treated the same as fourth liners. The response never changed. The rules of his crease were fixed, and everyone learned them quickly. Players adjusted because they had to. Rebounds were rushed. Second chances disappeared. The area behind the Islanders' net became empty, even for the best scorer in the league. Wayne Gretzky later admitted, "I stayed away from behind the net against Billy Smith. He was the only goalie I ever did that against." Officials called penalties, but the larger behavior stayed in place. Teammates defended it, opponents hated it. And a new question started to follow Billy Smith everywhere he played. Was this just part of winning hockey, or had the crease turned him into something the NHL no longer knew how to control? By the mid-1980s, Billy Smith's actions were no longer framed as self-defense by everyone watching. What once looked like crease protection began to look like payback. The line shifted, and Smith crossed it more than once. The clearest moment came in January 1985 against Chicago. During a front net scramble, Billy Smith swung his stick upward and struck forward Kurt Frazier in the face. Frazier's cheekbone was broken. This was not a missed call or a borderline play. The league stepped in and suspended Smith for 6 games, making him the first goalie in NHL history suspended for on-ice violence. Edmonton coach and general manager Glenn Sather said at the time that Smith was trying to hurt players, not make saves. After the suspension, Smith was no longer treated as a difficult player. He was treated as a risk. Officials watched him more closely than any other goalie in the league. The attention didn't stop him. It only exposed how little the league was prepared to do. When Smith returned, the slashes continued. Penalties piled up. Officials watched closely, but the pattern stayed the same. By the end of his career, he held the record for most penalty minutes by a goaltender, a number built almost entirely on stick work and confrontations. Reactions split along familiar lines. Teammates defended him openly, saying opponents knew what they were getting and should stay out of his crease. Coaches argued he was being singled out for doing what others were allowed to do quietly. Opposing players saw something different. To them, Smith was dangerous, unpredictable, and protected by his team's success. The NHL found itself stuck. Smith was a problem it couldn't ignore, but also a goaltender it couldn't remove. He won games, he won championships, and the league had no clear way to stop him without punishing the product it depended on. Quick shout out to Conway and Banks for sponsoring this video. Built for hockey players when the gear comes off. They've worked with Pavel Barber, so that should tell you enough. Code SKATES gets you 10% off. Links in the description. Back to the video. As Billy Smith's behavior drew more attention, the New York Islanders were building something the league couldn't ignore. From 1980 through 1983, the Islanders became the NHL's dominant force, winning 4 straight Stanley Cups and turning playoff success into expectation. Smith was at the center of it. The Islanders didn't treat Smith as a problem to be managed. They treated him as part of the plan. His presence shaped how teams approached the Islanders as a whole. The crease became another reason opponents hesitated, another layer of pressure built into every series. Winning changed the conversation around him. Each spring, the Islanders advanced deep into the playoffs, and Smith delivered when it mattered most. He stopped elite scorers, shut down high-powered offenses, and won games that decided championships. In 1983, he was named playoff MVP after backstopping another cup run. Results like that gave him leverage that few players ever have. As the trophies stacked up, the incidents faded into background noise. Penalties were treated as part of the cost of doing business. Complaints from opposing teams carried less weight when they came from teams being eliminated. Smith was drawing criticism, but he was also delivering marquee moments, rivalries, and championship drama. Suspending or sidelining him during peak playoff years would have meant interfering with the league's best team and biggest stage. As long as the Islanders kept winning, discipline stayed limited and delayed. The message was clear, even if it was never said out loud. Success covered a lot. Behavior was excused. And the question began to hang over the league without an answer. When winning becomes everything, responsibility stops wherever the league allows it to. Billy Smith stopped playing, but the fear around him did not. His name stayed alive in the league, not as a memory of skill, but as a warning. Players talked about him carefully because they remembered what happened when you forgot who he was. They remembered staying away from his crease, even when it cost them goals. They remembered changing habits that had nothing to do with hockey sense and everything to do with self-preservation. What made Smith different wasn't just that he was violent, but that the violence felt planned. This is why players described him less as angry and more as dangerous. The league reacted slowly, then permanently. The crease was expanded. Contact rules around goalies became stricter. Goalie sticks were redesigned to prevent hidden weapons. Interference became something officials were instructed to protect against, not ignore. Modern goalies now operate inside a bubble that didn't exist when Smith played, and that bubble was shaped by the damage he caused before the league stepped in. This is where the label stopped being optional. Smith wasn't just feared. He forced change by pushing past what the NHL was comfortable enforcing. That makes him more than a villain and more than a champion. He became a turning point where the league had to choose between allowing a psychopath in the crease or rewriting the rules to stop him. The question still lingers because the answer is uncomfortable. Did the NHL evolve despite Billy Smith, or did it only evolve because someone like him finally made fear impossible to ignore? Billy Smith's true power was not violence. It was certainty. Opponents didn't fear what he might do. They feared knowing exactly what he would do. Every encounter followed the same logic. Enter the crease, accept the consequence. No surprise, no warning, no hesitation. Smith removed uncertainty from the exchange, and that certainty changed behavior faster than intimidation ever could. This is where he separated himself from every other aggressive player of his time. Anger burns hot and fades. Smith's presence didn't fade. It stayed constant. He didn't lash out when challenged. He responded the same way every time. Over seasons, that repetition trained opponents the way systems train habits. Players adjusted not because they were scared in the moment, but because they knew the outcome in advance. That is not a loss of control. That is control perfected. Smith treated the crease like a closed system. You entered it on his terms or not at all. He didn't argue with referees. He didn't chase players around the ice. He waited. The game came to him, and when it did, the result was predictable. Predictability is what made him impossible to ignore and impossible to excuse. The discomfort around Billy Smith comes from this truth. He wasn't an accident. He wasn't a glitch in the game. He was a working model of what happens when competition rewards certainty without restraint. He showed how far someone could go by doing the same thing again and again, without apology, without deviation, until everyone else changed first. This is why he still unsettles people. You can forgive anger. You can explain emotion. Certainty is harder to dismiss. Smith didn't just survive his era. He defined its edge, then stood there until the game moved away from him. Billy Smith didn't just guard the net. He made sure everyone knew exactly what would happen if they forgot who controlled it. He won. He stayed in the net, and everyone else stayed away. The NHL didn't stop him until the game itself became uncomfortable to watch. That isn't a story about one player. That's a story about what hockey was willing to accept. And before you go, if you're grabbing anything from Conway and Banks, don't forget code SKATES gets you 10% off. Link in the description. If you want hockey stories that don't protect reputations or rewrite history, subscribe. Skates and Scars tells the stories exactly where the league stopped talking.